Well, when I was first married, I got married in August of 1990, August 11th, 1990. Yeah, that would make our children have a weird, with our marriage date. Anyway, it was in August of 1990, and I remember those early days in the tiny apartment very clearly because of the drama that unfolds in those first days of marriage. One of those drama moments happened when it was my night to make dinner, so I decided to make spaghetti for Kelly and I to eat together. Now, in my family growing up, we were a ragu family, and Kelly's family growing up was a Prego family. And so I had to decide, what am I going to do for the spaghetti sauce? So being the selfless and loving guy that I am, I chose to make it with ragu. And not only that, but I made the ragu sauce, and for me, it just wasn't quite spicy enough, so I added some garlic into the ragu as well. Even though I knew that Kelly didn't like garlic in her spaghetti sauce that much, being the selfless and loving husband that I was, I decided to put some in. So it comes to dinner, I serve it up real proud to Kelly, and we start eating together. And no kidding, at the dinner table, she asks me point blank, "Did you put extra garlic in the spaghetti sauce?" And I said to her straight up, straight face, "Oh, no, sweetheart. I know you don't like garlic. I wouldn't do something like that." Gosh, it really tastes like there's garlic in here. It really tastes like there's extra garlic in the ragu. I'm thinking, she wasn't raised on ragu. She can't tell the difference if there's extra garlic or not. So anyway, we broke and I did the dishes, and I was just overwhelmed with guilt from that moment. I lied to my new bride about something that totally doesn't matter, and I lied. I'm guilty. So overwhelmed with guilt, I went into where she was, and I sat down and I said, "Kelly, I have a confession that I have to make. I did put garlic in the ragu, and I lied about it." And Kelly's response was, "Yes, I knew it. I knew I was right." I mean, she wasn't hyper about the fact that I lied to her. She was just happy that she was right. And at that moment, when you lie to your wife, you break a trust, you need a second chance. And our marriage has been full of hundreds of different faux pas and mistakes and errors. And I'm just so glad that every time Kelly has given me a second chance. And so 22 years later, we're still married to each other. Everybody needs a second chance at some point in their life for things that are a big deal or a little deal. Oftentimes we think second chances are just reserved for the people who have the drama story. I was face down in a gutter, or I was strung out on drugs, or I was a felon, and God gave me a second chance at life. And while that's totally valid, I think most of the time that God gives us second chances, it's when our lives are in a very ordinary place. Most of us think of ourselves that way, as someone who's really pretty ordinary in our culture. But there are ordinary people who need a second chance in ordinary life. I mean, maybe you're somebody who at some point in your life you failed. You failed in school. You failed to get into the college of choice. You failed in your job. Or maybe you made a really bad moral choice somewhere along the way. Some of you may be at a place where your spouse, your husband, your wife has died, and you just don't know if you can go on with life. Your life needs a second chance. Maybe you're somebody who was in a relationship with somebody who loved you at one point, and that person doesn't love you anymore. And you wonder if you're going to get a second chance at love. But the truth is, at different points in our life, all of us need a second chance, third chance, fourth chance. And as I was doing a bit of a survey of the Bible and looking of all the characters in the Bible, this is not statistical, this is just kind of intuitive. Of all the characters in the Bible, do you know who I think may have received more second chances than anybody else in the Bible? Peter. Peter, I think, may have received the most second chances. Peter, the disciple who followed Jesus so closely that if Jesus stopped, he would bump into him. Peter's a guy who was close to Jesus, and he messed up, and he constantly, despite messing up, got second, third, and fourth chances. So for the 5 messages that I'm doing out of this series, we're going to be focusing in on the life of Peter and all the second chances that he's got. So if you want to turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 5, that's where our teaching's going to come from this morning. Luke chapter 5, beginning at verse 1. And it starts off saying this: One day, Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret with the people crowding around him and listening to the word of God. Now, let's just stop there at the end of verse 1. Luke mentions him standing by the lake of Gennesaret, which is another word for the Sea of Galilee. Okay, that's where he is, the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is on the northern edge of Israel, kind of borders the northeast corner of Israel. And Galilee, this region of Galilee, was Jesus' ministry headquarters. In particular, there were 3 cities that he frequented. Capernaum is the place that was Jesus' main place, his main headquarters. Inland a little bit was a city called Chorazin. And then around the curve was a little fishing village by the name of Bethsaida. Now, in this episode, Jesus is right here in Bethsaida. And what do you know? From this tiny little fishing village, 5 of Jesus' 12 disciples got chosen. Philip, James, John, Andrew, Peter, all of them were from this fishing village called Bethsaida. Now, this is noteworthy because this is not the kind of place that you would normally expect to go to find disciples. I mean, there were bigger cities close to Nazareth, like Sepphoris or Jerusalem, that you could get to try and select the academic elite. But Jesus went to this fishing village that had probably 600 to 800 people in it. Maybe 10 to 15 extended families made up the city of Bethsaida, and their primary means of support was fishing. They're a fishing village. Now, this is not a very long distance. It's just about 3 miles from Capernaum to Bethsaida. It'd be like walking from here to Crossroads or here to 144th, or if you're in the Bellevue campus, from here to 48th Street. It's a journey that you could probably make in about an hour walking time. And Jesus went there to meet people, to teach, and to select some of his disciples. Now, at this point, Jesus is on the beach, and it's kind of a marketplace arena. Lots of people would gather in the beach in the morning. Jesus was there, and he was teaching. And the place that he was teaching would have kind of a natural hillside amphitheater, and the crowds gathered around, and he would teach them. But if the crowds became too thick, it would be necessary to get in a boat and go further out into the water. And from that position, you could actually hit a wider swath of people on the shore and go up the natural amphitheater and be able to speak to more people. This is the position that Jesus finds himself in right at this point. Now, if you go back a little ways, you'll find that Jesus had already been teaching for some time. He had already been with some of his disciples to Jerusalem and back. That episode you may remember from the Bible with Andrew seeing Jesus, that one's already happened, and he brought his big brother Peter to come and meet Jesus. Peter has heard Jesus teach quite a bit by this time. By this time, Peter has seen water turned into wine. He's seen the first cleansing of the temple. He's seen Nicodemus visit at night and stop by Samaria to hang out with a woman at the well. Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist, had been thrown into prison. And so all of the disciples and Jesus went back to Galilee, where John the Baptist had been thrown into prison. By this time in the story, Peter had already received a new name. His original name that his parents gave him was Simon, but Jesus saw him and renamed him the name Peter, which means the stone or the rock. He saw something in Peter. He saw something big, something rocky big. So he says, "Hey, I know what I'm going to call you. I'm going to call you Rocky from this point forward." So he names him Rocky. Now, in ancient times, renaming is a serious power. It wasn't just a little nickname that you would give somebody, because names were not just hooks that you attach people on in order to have something to call them. Names had very deep meaning that came from the parents. And so when a person was renamed, you were changing their identity. And Jesus said, "Peter, in you, I see a new identity. You are somebody who is worth building something on." And we find out that something is the church, this movement that Jesus was going to start. You're solid. So after the renaming and after some journeys with Jesus, Peter is out fishing. He hears Jesus teach, and I think it's important for us to note this because sometimes when we come to this scene, we think that Peter is just some kind of randy fisherman sitting on the sidelines that Jesus grabs from the crowd, but it's not. He's actually been listening to Jesus for quite a while at this point. So Jesus is teaching the crowd, and it says this in verse 2. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and he asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. So I want to ask a strange question at this point. And the strange question is this: why is Peter fishing? I mean, on a shallow level, the answer is obvious. He grew up fishing. His dad was a fisherman. It was the way that Peter put food on the table, was by fishing. It was the way that he made money to provide for his young wife. He was a fisherman because it made some money. But I want to ask a deeper question. Why was Peter fishing? More on a macro level, why was Peter fishing? Well, let's assume at this juncture, we don't know for sure, but that Peter was about 18 years old and newly married. Let's go back about 13 years when he entered the synagogue school, because that's what kids did. In towns like Bethsaida, the entire social life of the community revolved around a synagogue, and this is a picture of ancient synagogue ruins. And attached to a synagogue would be a school where the children learned the ways of the Torah. People went to school, especially the boys, but maybe some of the girls as well, and they learned the curriculum. And the curriculum in elementary school is the Torah. It is the first 5 books of the Bible. So by the time a kid finished elementary school, they knew the Torah well. They knew many parts of the Torah by heart. And some elementary schools elementary school students knew the entire first 5 books of the Bible memorized by heart by the time they graduated from elementary school. Like even Leviticus, they knew by heart. Now, some of the students from that point would go back into the family business, but the best and the brightest, they would continue on to what's called Beth Midrash, their equivalent of secondary school. And the motivated, available students would go to there, and the people with exceptional ability would start studying and memorizing and making connections between the Psalms and the prophets and the Torah. The very best students would memorize the entire Old Testament by the time they were about 14 years old. I mean, it's hard enough just to get all of us to read the Bible. These guys were memorizing it at an early age. What a feat. Now consider, this may seem like an outrageous thing, but I don't think it's that outrageous when you consider that 8-year-olds memorize all 66 levels of Super Mario World and can quote every line of Phineas and Ferb by heart. But in that day, they just applied their memorization skills in a more constructive manner. Now, this area of Israel, this northern part of Galilee, was a center of a very specific kind of education after Beth Midrash. Among the very best of these young teenagers, a select few would attach themselves to a rabbi and become his disciples, and these disciples had a specific name, and the name was Talmidim. And I think that's such a cool word that it becomes our big word of the week. Everybody say the word Talmidim. Talmidim, or Talmid, is the singular of disciple. Talmidim is plural. But a Talmid is somebody who wants to be what the rabbi is. It's not just someone who wants to learn from the rabbi, who wants to have the same knowledge of the rabbi. It's somebody who wants to be what the rabbi is. So they would follow him everywhere. They would go to watch him teach so that they could teach like him. They would go and watch him pray so that they could pray like him. They would watch him eat so that they could eat like him. They would watch him clean out his ears so that they could clean out their ears like he cleaned out their ears. Well, okay, that's a little extreme. But it took a deep and consuming passion to become like the rabbi. But they were obsessed with it. And here at Christ Community Church, we are also obsessed with this idea of making disciples, Talmidim, disciples of the rabbi, the ultimate rabbi. As a matter of fact, that's what our mission statement is as a church. We're making disciples of Jesus for kingdom impact. If you are consumed to be like the rabbi, you're ready to be Talmid. So let me ask you, are you a disciple? Because disciples aren't just believers, disciples are imitators. Disciples are people who are consumed with passion to know and be with the rabbi. People who want to drink in his word, people who want to spend time with him. You need to be consumed every minute to be his disciple if you want to become Talmidim. Jesus said, interestingly, a student is not above his master. It is enough for a student to become like his master. And that's a reflection of the ancient practice of the Talmudim, that the student would become like their master. And in the ancient world, when you followed a rabbi closely, wherever he went, you would be said to be covered in the dust of your rabbi's sandals, or covered in the dust of your rabbi. And it was a statement of honor for how close you follow the one who you're trying to become. That's what it is to be a talmid, a disciple. But in order to become one of these disciples, you had to find a rabbi who would take you first. So after graduating from Beth Midrash, if you had that fire, you found a rabbi who you really wanted to be like. And they would let the rabbi know, I want to be like you, I want to follow you. And when they did, they would approach him, and there would be some kind of an initial trial period and testing and knowledge and interviews to see if you could make the cut. And if you had the knowledge, if you had the goods, if the rabbi liked you, he would say these words, "Come, follow me. Come, follow me." But the truth is, most were turned down. There were only a few slots available, and the ones who didn't make the cut were told, "Go and ply your father's trade. Go back to do the trade that you were raised up in." A no would mean you go back to the trade. So now, fast forward to Peter, who's 18 years old, and he's out throwing out nets all night long as a fisherman. What does that mean? Well, it means that Peter has already failed. At some point in his life, he didn't make the cut. We don't know if it was between elementary school and secondary school. We don't know if he made it through secondary school and some rabbi told him no. But we know that he's not with a rabbi, he's fishing. And so that means he's not the valedictorian. He didn't make it into MIT. He hadn't been chosen. He was just average. And so he went fishing. You ever feel like that? You ever feel like, I'm just average? You know, not special curve wrecker this way, not a special curve wrecker that way. I'm just average. There's a lot of times that I feel that way. When I first came here to Christ Community Church about 6.5 years ago, I taught from the stage with fear and trepidation because the guy who came before me as the lead pastor was named Bob Thune, and he was a guy who was sharp, and he was godly, and he was a great communicator. He had his act together, and I was pretty intimidated to be the next guy who came after him. And I would preach, week by week with fear and intimidation. I remember one week I got off the stage feeling pretty good about my message, and up came to me a guy who's become a friend. He's kind of a special friend here at Christ Community. His name's Steve Adams. And Steve said to me as I came off the stage, "I know what I'm going to call you. I'm going to call you Mr. Average." I thought, well, there's a name I can wear with pride. I said, well, tell me why. Why you calling me Mr. Average, Steve? And he said, well, because Bob Thune, he was really good looking. And he had great hair and a good golf game. And, Bob Thune, he was a scholar. He really knew his stuff and he could preach it. You're just kind of Mr. Average. I said, oh, thanks for, filling my soul with encouragement here today. And every time I see him in the hallways, he tells me, he says, hey, so how's Mr. Average? And anytime I'm feeling a little bit too full of myself, God just brings Steve Adams into my life, and he says, how's Mr. Average? I bet maybe you've felt that way sometimes as well. Mr. Average. I bet Peter felt that way from time to time. So here's Jesus coming up to Peter, sees him at the water's edge, and these are the same verses we just read. He saw one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and he asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people. And in this small gap right here is something that's implied in the text, and that is that Peter said yes, and he let him use the boat. And they went out, and Jesus taught from Peter's boat. Jesus comes and asks to use his boat. Why? Well, first of all, Jesus just has a practical need. I need to get out on the water so that I can teach more people. His friend Peter has one, and it's pretty pragmatic. But it also demonstrates a key aspect of Peter's life. It's implied, without any fanfare, that Jesus asked Peter to do something, and Peter just did what Jesus asked him to do. Pretty simple. And what we find in this is a principle. Peter had a bias for action. It was one of his very best traits. So in a very public way, in front of all of the hundreds of people who are gathered on the shore, who are from his family and his neighborhood, who he knows well, he associates himself with Jesus. He says, yes, Jesus, you can use my boat, and I'll sit right next to you while you teach all the people from my hometown. Peter had a bias for action. And it wasn't only true in this passage that was a defining moment for Peter, it was also true for the rest of his life. Let me do a quiz, and you fill in the name of the person who this is true of, okay? Who had a bias for action? When Jesus was walking on the water, who was the only one to get out of the boat and walk with him? That was Peter. When Jesus asked, who do you say that I am? And every other disciple said nothing. Who was the one who said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God? That was Peter. When Jesus went up to the Mount of Transfiguration and there was this amazing transformation happen, nobody knew what to say. Who was the one who proposed, hey, let's build 3 monuments, one for each of these guys? That was Peter. Who was the guy who, when Jesus was being threatened, he pulled out a sword and cut off some guy's ear? That was Peter. It was always Peter. Now, Peter was not always right, but he always did something. He had a bias for action, and that's why he grew so much. It was because he tried. It was because he took a flying leap. And he felt so free to fail because he knew that in all of these episodes, he was standing right next to the God of second chances. He knew that if he was going to sink into the water, that the God of second chances would pick him up. He knew that if he said something stupid, the God of second chances would correct him. He knew that if he cut off some guy's ear and it was the wrong thing to do, Jesus could just pick it up and put it right back on. He knew that there was always a second chance waiting for him. And when you know that you serve the God of second chances, you can take a flying leap and know that Jesus will be there on the other side to pick you up, even if you land in a mess. So today, I want to introduce something that's going to give you the opportunity to take just a small flying leap. Okay? It's called an action card, and here in the worship center, it's in your pew racks. In Access, it should be on your seats, and online, there's a little action tab that you can click in order to see this card. Get these out and pass them around to the people who are close by you, because I'm going to give you a chance to do something today that will allow you to take action, take a little bit of a flying leap. And the action card has 3 different options on it. One of them is, I want to get baptized on February 24th. We're going to have some baptism services here in the church on February 24th. And if you're somebody who says, you know what, I am a follower of Jesus, but I've never gone public with it, baptism is the way that you go public as a demonstration that you follow Jesus. And if you think that's something that I need to do, just check that box right there. Maybe you're somebody who needs to get connected in community. You want to be a part of a group that's on mission and growing to be disciples. You want to be a Talmudim, but you don't have a group of people to do it with to learn from the rabbi. Well, check the second box, and you can get connected in community, either through our group link that's going to be happening on January 20th, or our people will give you a call and help you find a group that fits you best. And then the third box is actually a pretty simple one, pretty easy. I want to stay connected with CCC, and that'll get you added into an email list that I'll be sending out emails to keep people connected and informed every week from now on for the foreseeable future. Then here's where you get a little bit risky, because normally in churches, you fill this out, you put your name on it, and you nicely pass it down the row, right? But today, we're going to get you a chance to do something a little bit more public, and that is, if you want to do something, I want you to hold the card up in the air like this, okay? And we have ushers that are going to come by and pick up your card from you. The ushers will come, like the hot dog vendors, you know, hey, better. Hot dogs. Anyway, they'll come by and they'll pick up those cards. So you can check the box. Be sure you put your information on the back, especially if you want to be on our email list so that we can contact you. You just hold that card up in the air. Now, some people in the former service were kind of little wusses and they passed their card down the aisle and let the guy give it to the usher. We're not doing that. We're holding it up in the air. So if God prompts you to do one of these things, just hold it up in the air. The ushers will come by. You can do it any time during my message and keep on doing it during the service. If God prompts you to, go ahead and hold that card up, and the ushers will pick them up. It won't bother me to have this little bit of chaos going around, especially in the video venues. You can wave cards all around. It won't bother me at all. All right, so we'll go ahead and do that if that's something you want to do. But I also need to let you know, before you hold that card up in the air, which I know some of you are active doing that, is that once you get collected, if you decided to get baptized or get in a community, we're going to post your card up on a board out in the hallways. So everybody will know that you're going to identify with Jesus. You're going to be a Talmudim getting connected into a group. The email ones we won't post, but the other ones we're going to post as kind of a bold step of faith. So hold those up, and we'll have a ball with those. You can do those all service long if God prompts you to do that. All right. Well, here's what Jesus says to this action-oriented disciple. This action-oriented disciple, when he finishes his teaching, it says this. When he finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night, and we haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." So Peter, at this point, has seen Jesus do miracles before, but not on the water, not on his turf. Peter's notably resistant to do what Jesus tells him to do because fish are not active this time of day. This is a bad spot for fishing. We fished all night with no luck. I mean, Peter's like, I'm an expert in this field. I've got thousands of repetitions in this game, and I'm not going to catch any fish. But because you say so, Jesus, I'll take this small act of faith. And he throws the nets over the boat. Now note, this is the second small act of obedience that Peter has taken. The first one was to let Jesus teach from the boat, to let Jesus use his boat, to let Jesus use his boat. See, when he said yes to Jesus in the very little thing, it gave him a front row seat to listen to Jesus, and it gave him access to Jesus so that when miracle time happened, he was ready for the next step. Do you realize that this is all Jesus ever asks of you? All he ever asks of you is to do the next step. Now, let me use your boat, your resources, your relational network, your finances, your business, your school, your spiritual gifts. Oftentimes, these are small requests that are not a very big deal, but it turns out to become a very big deal. Because when you obey Jesus in the little things, then you're positioned to get a front row seat to see the miracles that Jesus is up to. And Jesus is looking for people like Peter who have a bias for action, a bias for obedience, who will take a flying leap. He doesn't usually begin by telling people, here's the big master plan and all the steps to get from A to Z. He just says, here's the next step. Go to this event. Make the phone call. Pray for this person. Meet that stranger. And when you do the next step, you find out that this is the key to growing. It's not the big things, it's just the next thing. And whatever he calls you to do, because whatever he's inviting you to do is going somewhere. You never see miracles of Jesus when you refuse to obey in the little things. Your second chances come when you listen and you obey. So this is what it says. It says, when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come on over and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. They had a record catch at the wrong time in the wrong place. And I imagine what Peter was thinking at this point. He throws the nets in the water and he starts collecting them in. He's like, wow, these nets are full. I can't even get them in. Let's just start throwing the fish into the boat because there's so many fish that are here. And I don't know what's going on with this carpenter guy, but he told me the right things. He should be able to shape wood or stone or something, but knowing where to fish, that's just not in his world of expertise. It's almost as if the fish swam into the nets. It's almost as if he made the fish swim in my nets. And he realizes in the moment of the miracle that ordinary people don't do this kind of thing. I mean, he probably had an inkling that this guy is the Messiah. He's some kind of a miracle worker. He does something special. But it's in this moment that he realizes he's face to face with deity. This is God in the flesh who's standing right in front of him. And you can tell by his response. He says, when Simon saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. He said, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Same thing that Isaiah said when he saw the vision of God. "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." He knows that this is the right response. When you come before a holy God, you just get aware of all of the sinfulness that's in your life. And it wasn't that Peter wanted to get rid of Jesus. He just realized his own unworthiness. And so he falls to his knees in this boat full of flopping fish and confesses who he is before this God, someone who's unworthy. Jesus doesn't send Peter away because he's the God of second chances. Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll catch people." So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, including their record-breaking catch, and followed him. See, Jesus gave him a second chance and redefined the entirety of what his career, what his calling, what his life was going to be about. Jesus made his call from ordinary people who had already failed. Guys who didn't get into rabbi school, godly guys, but not good enough to be on the all-star team. Jesus chose them. Jesus believed in them. Jesus, of all people, called them and said to them, "You can be like me." Jesus believed in them. And for the rest of their lives, they would rejoice because a rabbi, not just a rabbi, the rabbi of rabbis called them. They weren't good enough in the system, but God wanted them on his team, and he said to them, "I choose you." So Peter gets a second chance at his life purpose. He gets a new job. He already has a new identity. He's the rock, but now he's got a new calling: catch people. Catch people. Wherever you go, Peter, your job is to catch people. It's his second chance. And the God who can make fish swim into nets is calling him to be a new kind of fisherman. And if he can make fish swim into physical nets, maybe, just maybe, he can also make people swim into spiritual nets. Peter knows that this new job may be hard work, labor intensive. It might take him all night long and a number of different casts of the net. But if Jesus is with him, maybe, just maybe, if I follow him and do what he says, then I'll be able to catch people. I think the same thing could be said of you and of me. Maybe, just maybe, if I follow him and do what he says. Maybe, just maybe, if you follow him and do what he says, then you'll be able to catch people. Because that's God's calling on our lives. He's redefined our mission. Catch people. Make disciples. God's doing this, and he wants to do it all over our city, in marketplaces and schools, and he's looking for people who will follow him with a reckless abandon and say, "I will be Talmid, I will be his Talmidim, and we'll do it together." Will you choose to be one of those people? Jesus is inviting you in. So I want to challenge you to make 2013 a year where you follow hard after Jesus. A year that you make a plan and write that plan down. A year that you grow in your faith with intentionality. The truth is, people who actually write down their spiritual goals are far more likely to achieve their spiritual goals. And it's true that when people seek God for their next steps and act on them, they grow exponentially faster than people who don't. So you'll notice in our publication called The Hub is a personal growth plan. It's also available in electronic form on the front page of our website or on a tab that is on our online campus. And you can fill out this personal growth plan for yourself. It's just got some prompts to help you be intentional. Like, what are you going to do to celebrate? What worship service are you going to make it a priority to be at every single week? How are you going to connect with a group of people who are the Talmidim that will be your community? How are you going to contribute with your spiritual gifts for the sake of God's kingdom? What books are you going to read? What experiences will you have? What are your goals for this year? take some time, ask God to lead you, and do whatever your next steps are. This action card may be irrelevant to you. You may say, I'm baptized, I'm on the mailing list, and I'm in a journey group. And your next step then is just to be intentional about whatever the next step is that God's leading you to. Fill this out, pray it over, and see what God does. Everybody needs to take a next step. Everybody needs a second chance at some point in their life, and God's offering it to you. Peter got a second chance at his life purpose, and you can have one too. Let's pray together. God, thanks so much that you're a God who loves people with a bias for action, that you pick us up when we fail, and that you call us to do the next step. And when we do that, God, you do miracles in our lives and all around us. And we can't wait to see what you're doing. So, God, we listen for your voice, and we ask you to speak so that we can do the next step with obedience. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.